Welcome to the next lecture of American Government 1. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Baggs, and our topic this week is political parties. What are political parties? What is in a letter? D. R. How do people vote in an election without party labels? We will attempt to answer these questions and more in the course of this lecture. A political party is an organized group that attempts to influence government by getting its members elected to important government offices. Identification with or support of a particular party or cause is known as partisanship. Parties play an important role in facilitating voting by organizing elections and simplifying choices. Schatzsnyder, in his seminal work on parties, claimed, quote, "The political parties created democracy, and modern democracy is unthinkable save in terms of the parties," end quote. This view runs counter to a long-standing and deeply seated distrust of parties. The Constitution makes no mention of parties, and some of the framers and early leaders of the country worried about parties, which they sometimes called factions. George Washington, in his farewell address, warned that parties, quote, "may become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government." End quote. John Adams, our second president, also dreaded political parties, which he considered evil. These sentiments are somewhat ironic, considering that both presidents were leaders of the first political party, the Federalist. Without parties, voters would face a daunting challenge of choosing between scores of candidates for each office. We would need to research the policy positions of each individual candidate in order to make an educated choice. American voters take for granted the peaceful transfer of power from one party to another. In new democracies, holding power may be more important than democratic principles, and well established parties help to stabilize democracy. Party systems. Historians refer to the set of parties that are important at any given time as a party system. The United States has not always had the same two dominant parties. Party systems can change even if the parties don't, because of divisions within them and changes in their supporting coalitions. There have been 6 distinctive party systems in U.S. history. The first party system. In 1787, parties began to form as citizens debated ratifying the U.S. Constitution, and then the first parties emerged largely out of practical necessity. To get Congress to pass its measures, President Washington had to fashion a coalition among factions. Alexander Hamilton built an informal Federalist Party while Washington stayed above politics. Federalists largely represented New England merchants and supported protective tariffs and the creation of a national bank and advocated for a strong national government. In effect, the Federalist Party was a regional party despite Washington's leadership. Thomas Jefferson and other officials despised Hamilton and opposed the economic policies that he favored. However, Their overriding concern was the success of the new government, and personal loyalty to Washington was a close second. So, despite his opposition to Washington's policies, Jefferson stayed in the cabinet through most of the first term. When Jefferson left the cabinet at the end of 1793, many who joined him in opposition to the administration's economic policies remained in Congress, forming a group of legislators opposed to the Federalist fiscal policy and eventually to Federalist foreign policy, which they claimed was soft on Britain. This party was later known as Republicans, then as Democratic Republicans, and finally as Democrats. To distinguish them from later Democrats, just call them Jeffersonians. The Jeffersonians represented Southern farmers, supported free trade, states' rights, and wanted a close relationship with France. The second party system. After the demise of the Federalists as a national party, the U.S. entered into the era of good feelings in which there was no effective opposition to the Democrats in the federal government. This absence of an opposition party lasted until the presidency of Andrew Jackson. Politics hates a vacuum, and the Whig Party grew out of a general distaste of how Jackson governed and his economic policies. The Whigs were strong in the Northeast and among the merchant class, but were united more by opposition to the Democrats than any particular policy or ideology. When Van Buren followed Jackson into the White House in 1837, the Democrats had become a large nationwide movement with national and state leadership, a clear party doctrine, and grassroots organization. The Whigs were nearly as strong because in 1840 they put their own man, General William Henry Harrison, into the White House. The third party system. The third party system emerged in the lead up to the Civil War. The issue of slavery split the Whigs between their Northern and Southern supporters, and the anti slavery faction formed the Republican Party, who adopted the nickname Grand Old Party. Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860 with the support not only of financiers, industrialists, and merchants, but also of many workers and farmers. For 50 years after the Civil War, the Republican coalition won every presidential race except for Grover Cleveland's victories in 1884 and 1892. The Republicans essentially were the party of the North, while the Democratic Party survived with its durable white male base in the South. The fourth party system. The fourth party system was characterized by several key features, and this era is often referred to as the Progressive Era. Republicans became the majority party, particularly in the industrial Northeast and some border states. The focus shifted from the issues of the previous party system to new issues like the regulation of railroads and large corporations, protective tariffs, labor unions, and banking system reform. There was also the issue of political corruption, and the Republican progressive movement pushed for reforms that challenged traditional political norms. Parties adapted their platforms to address progressive demands, reshaping the electorate. The direct primary election took control of nominations for party leaders and gave it to the rank and file. In addition, a number of cities instituted nonpartisan governments, totally eliminating the role of a party. In 1913, voters won the right to choose their senators through popular vote under the ratification of the 17th Amendment, and in 1920, women won the right to vote under the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Thus, in a short time, the electorate changed, the rules changed, and even the stakes of the game changed. The fifth party system. The fifth party system emerged during the 1930s during the Great Depression. Between 1929 and 1932, the GNP fell more than 10% per year, and unemployment rose from 1.5 million to more than 12 million, with millions more working only part time. With the economic crisis deepening, FDR and the Democrats were swept into office in 1932 on a tide of anti Hoover and anti Republican sentiment. Roosevelt promised that his response to the Depression would be a New Deal for America. The New Deal fundamentally altered the relationship between government and society by providing government jobs for the unemployed and using government expenditures to stimulate economic growth. Democrats argued that the government had to act to pull the country out of the Depression. Republicans objected to enlarging the scope of government and intruding into the economy. This basic disagreement about whether the national government should play an active role in regulating and promoting our economy remains one of the most important divisions between parties. The contemporary system. The six party system emerged during the 1960s due to major shifts in party demographics. The once solid South that Democrats could count on to bolster their legislative majorities and help win the White House has now become largely Republican South in presidential and congressional elections. This shift is explained by the movement of large numbers of Southern voters out of the Democratic Party, in part because of the party's increasing liberal ideology. The rise of the Republican South reinforced the shift to conservatism in the GOP. What parties do. Parties help mobilize citizens to vote, inform the public about government policies, and ensure that the public's voice is heard in policy debates. They also seek to gain political power by nominating candidates, getting them elected to public office, and winning elections. Parties are important to democracy and help solve three fundamental problems of democracy: how to regulate the number of people seeking public office, how to mobilize voters, and how to achieve and maintain the majorities needed to accomplish legislative goals. Recruiting candidates. One of the most important party activities is the recruitment of candidates to run for office. Party leaders look for candidates with experience holding public office, the ability to raise large amounts of money, and the ability to withstand severe scrutiny. Barriers to recruiting candidates include the extreme high cost of political campaigns, the extensive amount of time required for fundraising, and gerrymandered legislative districts. From the beginning, parties have been the mechanism by which candidates for public office are chosen. although parties have used various means to choose these candidates. Once candidates are decided upon, they appeal directly to their prospective constituents, who then vote for the party's candidate in a caucus or primary election. In a caucus, elected party members at the county, district, or precinct level select candidates to run for higher office, including the presidency. This method of nomination operated for several decades after the U.S. was established. But as early as the 1820s, the system was coming under attack, mainly because the caucus was not representative of the party as a whole. Only elected party members got to participate, and other party members were left out. The mixed caucus was an effort to make it more representative, and more rank and file party members began to be included. Some state parties have retained the caucus system by having its members participate in a set meeting to select their preferred candidates. Other state party organizations utilize the direct primary system, where voters elect their candidates for the general election. Primaries spread rapidly after Wisconsin adopted them in 1905, and by 1920 they were the norm in nearly all states. Primaries vary significantly from state to state in who may run in the primary, how they qualify for the ballot, whether the party in that state can endorse candidates before the primary, how many votes are needed to secure the delegates for that state. It's a plurality versus a majority, and who may vote in a party's primary, either open or closed. In states with open primaries, any voter, regardless of party, can participate in the primary of whichever party they choose. This kind of primary permits crossover voting, Republicans and independents helping to determine the Democratic nominee, and vice versa. Other states use closed primaries, in which only registered party members may participate. Participation in primaries is generally higher than participation in caucuses, and the earlier caucuses or primaries have higher rates of participation than the later ones because in many election years the nominee is determined well before the later states vote. Direct primaries have diminished the influence of the leaders of political parties because they now have less influence over who gets to be the party's candidate. Election rules. U.S. election rules contribute to a two party system with winner take all elections and single member districts. In each district or state, the candidate with the most votes, a plurality, wins the office, first past the post. There are no prizes for second place in American elections. These two factors gave rise to Duverger's law. This is a principle in political science that theorizes that in single member districts, first past the post electoral systems, there's a tendency towards a two party system. This is because voters often strategically choose the candidate most likely to win, rather than their preferred party, leading to a consolidation of support around the two most prominent contenders. Party labels. Parties have to organize the competition by providing party labels that help voters get a sense for the candidates. Without knowing anything about the individual candidates, voters can still make reliable assumptions about a candidate's positions based on the party label. Without a party label, other factors, at least some of which are entirely unrelated to the positions the candidate is likely to hold, may play a bigger role in voting decisions. The point is that party labels do important work for voters. They may not know much about a particular candidate, but knowing the candidate is a Republican or Democrat provides some information. Mobilize and unify. Parties help to mobilize the electorate to participate in elections. In the general election, party members are activated into local party workforces with their aim being to register voters early in the election cycle. Parties will send mail and email notices, make phone calls, organize registration drives, and knock on doors, all in an effort to convince more of their supporters to show up at the polls. Parties help unify the electorate and moderate conflict, at least within the party, because they have a strong incentive to resolve their internal differences and come together to take on the opposition. Moreover, to win elections, parties need to reach out to voters outside their party and gain their support. National committees. Each party has a national committee, headquartered in Washington, that oversees organizing the party's national convention, developing its political platform, and coordinating campaign strategies and fundraising. The committee members are chosen by the state delegations at the national convention every 4 years, and these committees are often agents of an incumbent president in securing his or her renomination. When there is no incumbent president seeking re-election, the National Party Committee is generally neutral until the nominee has been selected. The National Party Convention is held every 4 years and is attended by delegates from each of the 50 state party organizations. It is the supreme authority in both major parties. The National Party Convention has three major rules: nominate candidates for president and vice president, ratify the party platform, and adopt the rules that will govern the party until the next convention. The National Committee is in charge of the National Party when it is not assembled in convention, and its top official is the National Chair. The National Committee formally elects the chair, but in reality, this official is the choice of the presidential nominee. For the party that controls the White House, the chair actually serves at the pleasure of the president and does the president's bidding. The party platform that is adopted every 4 years at the National Convention spells out the most important values and principles on which the parties are based. The typical party platform is often a vague and ponderous document, the result of many meetings and compromises between groups and individuals. Platforms are ambiguous by design, giving voters few obvious reasons to vote against the party. Platforms rarely help elect anyone, but platform positions can hurt a presidential candidate because the nominee does not always control the platform writing process. The platform drafting process gives partisans who are generally further right or left of the general population the opportunity to express their views. These views are often at odds with the voting public. Congressional, state, and local committees. Both parties have organizations for each level of government: national, state, and local. The state and local levels are structured much like the national level, with each state having a state committee headed by a state chair. State law determines the composition of the state committees and regulates them. Members of state committees are usually elected from local areas. Below the state committees are county committees, which vary widely in function and power. These committees recruit candidates for such offices as county commissioner, sheriff, and treasurer, and etc. Parties in government. Political parties are central to the operation of our government because they help bridge the separation of powers and facilitate coordination between levels of government in a federal system. In the legislative branch, congressional power and influence is determined by whichever party has the majority of members in the House or Senate. Parties form the basic organizational unit for running Congress. The majority party in the U.S. House selects the Speaker of the House, and in majority party in the Senate selects the majority leader. The majority party in the House and Senate selects the chairs of the committees and controls the legislative agenda. In the executive branch, presidents select nearly all senior White House staff and cabinet members from their own party. In addition, presidents typically surround themselves with advisors who have campaigned with them and proved their party loyalty. Partisanship is also important in presidential appointments to the highest levels of the federal workforce. In the actual policy realm, the party that wins a majority of seats in Congress or the presidency gets the opportunity to try to enact its policies and goals. However, because candidates can win nominations from voters directly in primaries, it is more difficult for parties to discipline members who do not support the party's policies. The American system is largely candidate centered. Politicians are nominated largely on the basis of their qualifications and personal appeal, not party loyalty. Party leaders cannot guarantee passage of their programs, even if they are in the majority. Loyal opposition. The party out of power closely monitors and comments on the actions of the party in power, providing accountability. There's also usually a polite interval following an election, honeymoon, which they call it, after which the opposition party begins to criticize the party that controls the White House. The length of the honeymoon depends in part on how close the vote was in the election, the contentiousness of the new administration's agenda, and the leadership skills of the new president. Honeymoons have grown shorter and shorter, and this puts pressure on the new president to move quickly to set the legislative agenda. Third parties. The role of third parties in American history is mixed. They have never shaped national policy from inside the government, and their influence on national policy and on the platforms of the two parties has been limited. The United States has a single member district winner take all system, where only the candidates with the most votes in a district or state takes office. Because a party does not gain anything by finishing second, minor parties in a two party system can rarely overcome the assumption that a vote for them is a wasted vote. Remember Duvinger's Law? Although they are unlikely to win, third parties do arise from time to time. Candidate based parties, which rise around a candidate, usually disappear when the charismatic personality does. Minor parties organized ideologically, such as communist, libertarian, or green parties, usually persist over a longer period of time than those built around a particular leader. Minor parties of both types come and go, and several minor parties usually run in any given election. Some parties arise around a single issue, like the right to life parties, active in some states like New York. Minor parties have never won the presidency or more than a handful of congressional seats, although they have done only somewhat better in gubernatorial elections. But third parties can influence in elections. In several close elections, the vote cast for one or another minor party would have changed the outcome of the election. Ross Perot's candidacy cost H.W. Bush in 1992 when he received 19% of the vote. Political scientists have been tying themselves in knots since then to discredit that premise and only have exit polls to back up their argument. Exit polls are plagued by sampling bias. That is, not everyone is equally represented in the poll, therefore, they are unreliable. Ralph Nader received 92,241 votes in Florida. If 537 of those votes had been cast for Al Gore and none for George Bush, Gore would have won that election. In 2016, Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate for president, received enough votes in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin to deny Clinton the presidency. In races where third parties emerge, some voters care more about casting a vote for a candidate whose views are closest to their own, even if that candidate has little chance of winning. Those who see the vote as largely symbolic exercise will likely vote for a minor party candidate who has little chance of winning. Divided government. Since 1953, divided government, with one party controlling Congress and the other the White House, has been in effect twice as long as united government, in which one party controls both legislative and executive branches. At other times, Congress has been divided control, with one party having a majority in the House and the other in the Senate. For 34 of the last 50 years, the United States has had divided government. Elections during the past few decades have seen power change hands many times without any long term shifts in the population and party allegiance. There's been some sorting, with Southern whites now more consistently Republican, African Americans more consistently Democratic, and Hispanics, women, and younger voters increasingly Democratic. But the fundamental party divide has remained remarkably stable. Party polarization is the distinguishing feature of the current party system. There is division between the two major parties on most policy issues and very little party crossover. The end.